Yeah,
contestant.
yeah. I feel like Nikki Goldberg
Listen, hold on, Mark.
is a croupier at the casino. Yeah.
No, Mark, listen, we have a winner.
Do
Shauna Talmud.
Ooh.
You win every Jewish argument immediately if your last name is Talmud. Be like, well,
It's
true. My family wrote the thing.
I'm into Russ Samolsky.
Several classes have required attendance to be here tonight or this afternoon, right? Where you guys are in the sunny weather. So before you just start picking on people's names, just remember they're not here because they want to be.
Right. They weren't here to get harassed.
They do want to be here.
They weren't here to get harassed about their name.
No.
This is mandatory fun for a bunch of students. We're very happy and not sorry.
Now, Professor Dr. Hecht, is UCSB meeting in person or are they scattered all over?
We're probably 99% on Zoom.
Because my recollection is that Santa Barbara, the UCSB campus, is about as idyllic a place to go to school as there is in the world.
That's correct, Mark, but we've had some big spikes of COVID in the residential area just north of the campus, and Santa Barbara is just a little bit under the really dangerous level.
Yeah.
And so
nevertheless, kudos to all of your students for choosing a school that's not only academically rigorous, but has a decent beach scene as well. Not a choice I made here in New England, but one I often...
Mark, how it remains academically vigorous is really a mystery, because I was visiting campus. I was there for like half a day, and my inclination to do any scholarly work was zero. Like, why would I? I'm here. It's amazing.
It is interesting. I taught for 1 quarter at Stanford, which is also this very beautiful place, though without the beach scene. And you'd see these professors, these world famous scholars, walking around in their sandals and Bermuda shorts, and you would just think, why write? Why publish? Why research? Why, there is tennis to be played. There is golf. There are handicaps to be worked on. I mean, why bother?
The two of us, Mark, we're really paragons of intellectual life. We really, that's how the species progresses. It's that kind of attitude that got our people where we are.
I didn't get the jaunty dress memo of this evening, and I apologize.
It's okay. That's A-okay. We are going to, the Jew content of this evening is going to be very high. And we're excited. We're super excited to bring some New York Jewish flavor to the laid back shores of Santa Barbara.
Look, Stephanie's all in black. She's really, I think, more representative of us than the two of us.
It's true. It's true.
I have I'm more colorful, but I'm wearing a lot of layers. It's very cold here in New York. It's cold here in my apartment room, and I don't know if you'll hear this, but the heat clanks really loud. After all of you graduate, head to New York to make your artistic dreams come true, and you too can sit shivering in your tiny apartment.
Right. You too can make poor life choices, is what Stephanie is saying.
Okay, I think.
All right, Professor.
We're going to start.
Let's do it.
Okay. Great. So let me first welcome you all to this. I think it's just going to be an extraordinary afternoon with the authors of the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia, which I have right behind me, from Abraham to Zabars and everything in between. And before I introduce them in a formal way, let me just tell you about a seminar that we've just put into our calendar. It's going to be a seminar done by the Walter H. Capps Center and the Taubman Symposia. It'll be on Tuesday, February 9th, we think at 6 p.m. And it is on the issue of white nationalism in Trump's insurrection. And we will be sending out, of course, announcements of the details of that very, very soon. So let me now introduce our speakers for the afternoon. It's really a pleasure to meet you and to have you join the Taubman. First, let me introduce in the middle of the screen Stephanie Butnick, who is the deputy editor of Tablet. She's written for the New York Times and also Wall Street Journal. And what is so wonderful about these three authors is they're all products of the study of religion in the United States. So Stephanie was an undergraduate in religion at Duke, and then took her master's degree in religious studies at NYU. We have in the Lyle Leibovitz, who is the senior writer for Tablet. And I hope they're going to tell us about Tablet, because if you're not reading Tablet, you're really missing out on some of the great Jewish journalism and scholarship that is available on the internet. So, and some of you may have seen Lael's most recent piece on Phil Spector. I think that appeared on, I think, Thursday or Friday of last week. Extraordinary essay. He holds a PhD in video games from Columbia. And he says about that, quote, his video games, his PhD in video games is, quote, a fact that makes his 7-year-old self very happy, end quote. He is also the author of, in the Jewish Life series of Yale University Press, Stan Lee, A Life in Comics, which is an extraordinary volume. It's behind me as well, I think, next to the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia. He's also published an extraordinary book entitled A Broken Hallelujah, Rock and Roll, Redemption, and the Life of Leonard Cohen in 2014. And then also with Todd Gitlin in 2010, Chosen People, America, Israel, and the Ordeals of Divine Election, which has received a great deal of reflection and discussion. And then finally, our third speaker is Mark Oppenheimer, who is a former beliefs columnist for the New York Times. He also holds a PhD in American religions from Yale University. He has published The Bar Mitzvah Crasher, Road Tripping Through Jewish America in 2018, a book that I've used in one of my classes entitled Knocking on Heaven's Door, American Religion in the Age of Counterculture in 2003 from Yale University Press, 13 and a Day, The Bar Mitzvah and Bat Mitzvah Across America, and then a book that I think is going to be very, very important and will be published in October of this year, Squirrel Hill, The Tree of Life Synagogue Shooting in the Soul of a Neighborhood. Before they speak, I just want to add one other thing. They have a podcast that is absolutely extraordinary. It's simply entitled Unorthodox Podcast. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts. And the most recent podcast, I'm about 2 weeks behind, I think, but their podcast, which is entitled Queuing Up, is just one of the most insightful discussions of conspiracy theory that I've heard. And we're introduced to Mark Rothschild, who is a researcher in the area. And the preface to that interview in the discussion between our speakers, Mark and Stephanie and Lael, is just an extraordinary discussion about the fear that has triggered amongst American Jews. So without any further ado, let me introduce our speakers, Mark Oppenheimer, Stephanie Butnick, and Lael Leibovitz.
Professor, thank you so much. Such an honor to be with you and with the UCSB students and with the Taubman Symposium attendees and with the greater Santa Barbara community. We're going to talk collectively for a little more than a half an hour, and then we want to leave a half an hour for questions from the gang. So I want everyone to, Professor, should they put those in the chat? How do you want to collect their questions?
Yes, please put the questions in the chat, and I will narrate them back to you when you're finished.
Terrific. Terrific. We had an interesting experience recently where there was one person in the chat at a very, very large Zoom event we did who didn't realize we could see the chat, and she kept, Oppenheimer. Yeah, she kept complaining. Oppenheimer talks too fast. Liel clearly didn't shower. Stephanie's inarticulate, and just so be gentle. We might read the chat. It is such a great pleasure to be with all of you guys. This book, the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia, is a great labor of love, and I'm going to start off by telling you kind of how we got there. As the professor indicated, the three of us are all affiliated with an online magazine called Tablet. It's at tabletmag.com. We consider it, and the internet considers it, the #1 source for Jewish news and culture on the web. And that's all the news and culture you can imagine, from Tel Aviv to Telluride, from Tzfat to Santa Barbara, everything under the sun, movies, cuisine, politics, theology, holidays, everything. The goal is to capture everything about Jewishness in one web magazine. And about 5 years ago, I saw that there was a growing community of people who were consuming their news and their culture, not necessarily through written material, or not only through written material, but also through podcasts. They wanted to put stuff in their earbuds. They wanted these radio shows that you could download onto a smartphone or onto a computer and stream them and take them with you. So I talked to Liel and Stephanie, and I said, guys, I really think there's a market for what we do at Tablet Magazine, but in people's earbuds. There's a market for some sort of tablet radio show or podcast. And I had an idea for what it would be, how we could encapsulate the magic that is Tablet Magazine in the podcast format. So here's what I said to Leah and Stephanie. I said, guys, how about this? We'll do a show. It'll be half an hour, 45 minutes, and it will have 3 parts. The first part will be what I'm calling News of the Jews. And this will be any kind of news that might be remotely interesting to Jews. It can be stuff that's extremely Jewish, like, guess what? The holiday of Yom Kippur is coming up, and people are talking about fasting, and people are talking about what deli spreads they're going to order for the breakfast afterwards. It could be very, very tied to Jewish observance, or it could be, guess what? Someday there might be a president who has a Jewish son-in-law, and guess what? Within a year of starting the podcast, we got a president with a Jewish son-in-law, and now we have a vice president with a Jewish husband. And it could be stuff that's just of interest because Jews like gossiping and talking about other Jews, or it could be Jews in culture. Whatever it is, 5 or 6 little bite-sized nuggets of news of the Jews every week. That will be the first part of the podcast. Part 2, let's interview a Jew every week. We'll call him or her the Jew of the week, and it'll be somebody who is making great music or writing great books or cooking great stuff or is in politics who's Jewish, and that'll be the Jew of the week. We'll interview that person for 15 or 20 minutes. And then, and this was the idea I was most proud of, I said, we have to have a spot for a non-Jew, because having just Jews talking to other Jews about Jewy stuff kind of limits the potential audience for the podcast. So I want to have a non-Jew of the week, a Gentile of the week. And there was a little quarrel, and we could talk about this later, about whether to refer to the person as a Gentile of the week, refer to them by what they are, or a non-Jew of the week, refer to them by what they're not. And that Gentile of the week will come on, and we will let that person, who may know nothing about Judaism, ask us any question they want about Jewish history, observance, culture, anything at all. And so that was going to be the show. News of the Jews, and then 2 guests, 1 Jewish, 1 Gentile. And, I thought it was a really good idea. I don't know if Liel and Stephanie thought it was a good idea, but I somehow twisted their arms into saying yes. And before I asked Liel to say a bit more about the origins of that podcast, because the podcast is what kind of leads into the book that we're going to talk about. I just want to say, excuse me while I have a sip of my martini. This was the only clean cup I could find in the whole house with my 5 children. We had to decide what to call the show, and there was some debate about that. Somebody suggested The Tribe. Somebody else suggested 3 Jews Not Shutting Up. Somebody else suggested Jews in Your Ears. I don't know. We had a bunch of stuff. I successfully argued in the end that we call the podcast Unorthodox, and we are super proud that since that time, it has become the #1 English language podcast about Jewish issues in the world, with many, many millions of downloads. It's about 6 million, though that's not a number that always necessarily has the best connotations for Jews. And after a while, the podcast became an established thing. It developed a fan base. And, one way or another, we figured what next with the brand, except maybe we should do a book. But I'm a little hazy on that history, and I want to turn it over to my colleague, my comrade in arms, Liel Leibowitz, to give us a little more of that early history.
Liel, before you start, let me just say we're using the question and answers for the the questions that I'll moderate to you at the end. I'm sorry to have interrupted you.
That's okay. Richard, we're still not going to look at them. It's all on you. We're not going to get thrown off our game by their questions.
You can interrupt us whenever you want. In fact, we're going to offer you a contract to come on the road with us because we're digging this energy very much. So it's 5 years ago.
If you interrupt us, we wouldn't know that you liked us.
Correct.
That's right. That's right.
Interrupting each other is literally our brand. It's all we do on the air every day for 5 years.
It's very hard, though.
And so it's 5 years ago, and it's a Friday afternoon. It's like 3:40. It's just before Shabbat begins. And I get this call from Mark, and he's like, a podcast about Jews. Like, get this. Awesome idea. And I hold the phone. I was like, no, very interesting. Cool idea, man. Yeah, sure. Then I hang up. And like a mean kid in high school, I call Stephanie. I'm like, oh my God, could you believe how stupid the idea Mark just came up with? And I felt this genuinely, in large part because I didn't really understand podcasting. It was kind of a unfamiliar medium to me. But in large part because it struck me as kind of preposterous that something as mighty and complex and deserving of our sort of hushed awe as religion and our religious life and affiliations could be dealt with in a way that would not feel needlessly earnest, needlessly heavy, needlessly, well, orthodox. And I couldn't hear this conversation in my ear, but because I like and respect Mark and Stephanie does too, we begrudgingly agreed to, come into this adventure. But the truth is that when we started this, and this is something that I think the students of religion feel very frequently when they try to interact with the world at large, we had no freaking clue how to make this podcast work. The first episodes, which I beg of you, please
don't listen to
them. We pretend like they never happened and start like 1 year in. The first episodes were all predicated on the premise that in order to be interesting and cool and listenable to, we had to play catch up to the culture at large. So the very first episode, and this is etched in my mind, I shall never forget this, had a very riveting discussion about whether Andy Samberg from the show Brooklyn Nine-Nine is indeed the next Adam Sandler, and whether Jay Swipe and J Date, I believe, two dating sites that are unfortunately similarly named, one day shall merge, which of course in clear Jewish fashion, there was a lawsuit and then one bought the other. But we did this because we felt like, okay, our job is to kind of like ride on the coattails of culture. And then a bunch of miraculous things happened. The first miraculous thing that happened is that people actually started listening to us, which is a completely non-obvious thing because, frankly, neither Stephanie nor I, but clearly not Mark, thought that this would ever be the case. The second thing that happened, that it was even more remarkable, is that the people who tuned in started expressing their opinions, which is not at all surprising because these are Jews, and if they didn't express their opinions, we would be worried. But what they told us was surprising because what they told us is like, hey guys, we're actually really interested in the religion part. We're actually really interested in the way life is lived, in traditions, in these ways of interacting with the world and being in the world from this very specific point of view. We don't just want you to tell jokes and be cute and comment on pop culture, although that's a huge part of our lives. We also want you to try and reflect the ways in which Jewish American life has changed so drastically in the last 50, 60 years to reflect so many new ethnicities, so many new forms and variations of religious belief, so many new ways of expressing gender and sexual identity. All these things matter a great deal, and they're part of this like larger, growing, gorgeous mosaic. And we actually want to hear more and more of that. We want you to kind of be our emissaries and orchestrate this conversation in a way that would make us feel more engaged, especially as so many of us these days don't necessarily do religion in the traditional ways that we used to think of 30, 40 years ago. We don't necessarily belong to a synagogue. We don't necessarily, daven or pray 3 times a day. We don't necessarily have anything tethering us to these communities and to these traditions. And you're it, this voice or these 3 voices in our ears every Thursday. This is the community. And once we learned this, we felt a tremendous sense of awe, of responsibility, and of sheer joy. Right, Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, it really changed our mission. I think at first we thought, oh, we'll entertain people. We'll have a show. It's called Unorthodox. It comes out on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast every Thursday. It's going to be fun and smart. But people actually wanted us to dig deeper because they were actually digging deeper. And what we found over the past 5 years, people really want to engage with Judaism. They don't want like they want to engage, and whether it looks different because it's not what their parents did or their parents aren't Jewish and they're discovering this on their own. I mean, we realized that a lot of people who were on their conversion journeys were listening to our show, but their rabbis in their Intro to Judaism courses were sort of saying, listen to this podcast, you'll hear sort of like living Judaism. And that just, I think
people interrupting each other. Welcome to that. Yeah.
You'll hear these words being used, and then you could sort of use them yourself. I mean, this idea that we were sort of helping people acclimate, and a lot of non-Jewish spouses or partners or friends of Jews were tuning in also because they had sort of questions. And so what we found really quickly was that we had this amazing community of listeners. We call them the J Crew. I think it's first was like the Jew Crew, and we were like, no, the J Crew. No one will sue us over that. We can't sell any clothing that says that. But in our hearts, it's the J Crew. But people started writing in, and they had a lot of questions. And so people would say, I don't live near a synagogue, or I would never set foot in a synagogue. How can I make Shabbat meaningful? And we say, actually, it's really easy. Get a challah. You can't find a challah, get anything else. Have a glass of wine. Don't want that, do something else. So there's really, we're sort of trying to show people that there are so many ways of making Judaism their own. We have on guests like these two young rabbinical students who have a blog and an Instagram called Modern Ritual. And they're all about making Judaism fit with your life and how to sort of take on these practices that might seem really scary because you've never done them before, and just making them really real for people. And so we sort of see ourselves as part of that narrative. And so the thing that we realized was that people had a lot of questions and they didn't really know where to go. I mean, you're not going to start Googling things about Jews, because I have to tell you, that does not take you to a good place on the internet. I would avoid doing that. Like, if you don't Google like, why do Jews, and see what autofills. It's not going to be pretty. But people had questions, and they weren't, going to their rabbi or going to their JCC the way they may have, 20, 30 years ago. They were coming to the three hosts of a podcast who are, we are just the messengers. We are imperfect messengers. We own our mistakes. We are journalists. We're not rabbinical authorities, but, people were coming to us. So we said, okay, we need to give the people some answers. The questions could be, I'm going to a bris for the first time. What do I do? Or, what the heck is Shmini Atzeret, and what is that holiday, and can I take off work for it? So, there were questions that were sort of profound and small in many ways, like very technical questions. What does this word mean? And so what we decided to do was write a book, right? Put all that information somewhere that was like our show, fun and accessible, but also like our show, really a font of knowledge and information for someone who might not be able to find that elsewhere.
Because it's 2020, and obviously that's a book is the medium that all the crazy kids go to. When we decided to write this book, initially we thought, hey, no problem. All we have to do is summarize all of Jewish history, culture, and ideas for the last 5,000 years in one accessible volume. Last time this has been tried with the Talmud, it took them a few more books than this. But we kind of realized right away that we were running into three different sets of problems that helped us think our way through this process, which I actually think are worthwhile sharing, because I think they're really good yardsticks for anyone in this field of studies, anyone kind of engaging with that type of work. The first set of problems is quite, obviously, when you're writing an encyclopedia, what makes it in? What's canonical? You're looking at us right now, so you have the benefit of seeing visually the differences between us. Mark and I, being cantankerous middle-aged men, argued that Mel Brooks is probably the youngest person who ought to make it into this book, and maybe Sid Caesar, too, but really no one younger than that. And Stephanie, God bless her, being both younger and wiser, said, guys, yes, it's obvious why these people who've already merited inclusion are here, but this is also a book for people alive in the world today. And so shows like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel or Broad City, that people are excited about as they are living and alive in the year 2021, really deserve a kind of representation. And so that was a nice, interesting little back and forth and push and pull between us. The second set of prompts was how to address these really huge issues that we wanted to capture, because the book has a lot of fun entries in it, a lot of pop culture, a lot of fun things, a lot of humor, but also, we actually wanted this to be a source of actual knowledge for people who wanted to really learn and start and engage in conversations. And so I'll give you a classic example. I wrote the entry about Zionism, and I thought to myself, hey, I'm an Israeli. I served in the Israeli army. This is going to be a really easy entry for me to write. It'll take a minute. It took like 45 seconds, and I was very pleased with it. I put it aside, and I came back to it a few hours later and read it and realized that if you didn't share like my exact beliefs about Israel, you could be forgiven for reading this particular entry and thinking that Bibi Netanyahu texted me from his Jerusalem, lair to how to make it exactly kind of, right-wing Hasbara or whatever. And we didn't want that, because we realized that the tension, the conversation between people who profoundly disagreed was a huge part of what makes this community and this pursuit so vibrant. And so we rewrote a third time, and also enlisted the help of 30 or 40 subject matter experts who joined us to sort of make sure that the book is truly diverse in its points of view and in its lived-in experiences. And then we ran into a third and final kind of big set of questions, which is understanding fairly early on in the process that no matter how diligent we were, we are going to at some point neglect including 1 or 2 or 56 entries that in turn are going to make readers turn to us and say, aha, you didn't include so-and-so and such because you secretly hate this person, or you have this agenda, or you have that set of ideas. And at first it really stressed us out. We really kind of felt anxious because we thought, oh my God, people are going to assume all these things. But then the more we thought about it, the more we realized that the essence of this book, much like, again, its predecessor, the Talmud, isn't to be some kind of definitive volume that gives you all the answers, but rather a volume that sparks all the right questions, and even more importantly, all the right conversations, and if you're lucky, all the right arguments. There are about 1,100 entries in this book, and we see every single one of them as an invitation to a conversation that revolves around what this entry means to you, what does being Jewish mean to you, and how do you construct, you as the reader, your own set of Jewish values and identities from this great big smorgasbord available to you in our tradition. So Stephanie, do you want to maybe share some of your favorite pages?
So this really is like an actual encyclopedia. It's alphabetical. This, you'll see there's a photo of both Sammy Davis Jr. and Moshe Dayan on this page. So something we really liked is, on this you see Dayenu, you see Zabar, you see Daniel Duranda. Like you see a lot of fun things on each page. And then we also have sort of like bigger essays. This is a whole essay about Jews and food. So we basically tried to give the concise, some entries are short, some entries are funny, some entries are long. Here, I'm gonna open, here's a fun page. We got Billy Joel, Scarlett Johansson, and Jonah. Also on this page, Al Jolson, Jews of Color, Job, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance. I mean, for us, a really fun thing was just the dynamic of what it means when you put things in alphabetical order. It means that there's like Krusty the Clown from The Simpsons is next to Kristallnacht, and you're just like, oh no, but we have to exist with both of these things, right? It's sort of a fun exercise in the dynamism of the Jewish experience, right? On every
there's a page, I just discovered this, that begins with, it's in the H's, it begins with Abraham Joshua Heschel, goes to High Holiday Tickets, Hillel International, the campus group, Hindu, people who are half Hindu, half Jewish, and then Adolf Hitler. So Adolf Hitler and High Holidays are literally on the same page, which I feel like it says a lot about the book that we're doing. And I never realized that.
High Holiday Tickets are too expensive, the two major complaints.
Right. I should also add, speaking of the sort of the happy, sad dichotomy, if you turn the page, the entry for Holocaust is right next to the entry for Hora, like the dance that you do at weddings. So it's like, if you're feeling up, you read the Hora. If you're feeling a little bit down, read the Holocaust. Both really, really central to the Jewish experience.
Yeah, I mean, to us, that was something.
Liel, do you have a favorite page?
It's the one that you already mentioned, the Krusty the Clown, Sandy Koufax, and the Kushners.
I didn't mean to steal your thunder there, but for us, point, right? You can sort of open to any page and find something funny, or you could flip a few pages and find something deeper and more profound. There's a whole 4-page spread about Jews and Christmas and why Jews eat Chinese food on Christmas, and actually talking about like the ethnographic undertones of like where that tradition came from. And it actually is like rooted in the Lower East Side immigrant experience. There's a whole essay about Jews in the garment industry, Jews in Hollywood, Jewish gangsters. You know, there's all sorts of sort of dip into bigger topics for more of a deep dive. I guess you can't dip in for a deep dive, but you get what I'm saying. But there's also just things that we think are helpful. We explain the word aliyah, which is you either, you know, it's 2 meanings. You can get called to the Torah during a temple service, or you can make aliyah and move to Israel. And we sort of explain that those are pronounced differently. I mean, this is really supposed to be a guide to living a Jewish experience.
And one of the things I think has really been exciting for us is hearing from observant Jews, religious Jews, often Orthodox Jews, who say, you know, I knew the religious side of this. I knew what the holidays were. I knew how to keep kosher, all of those things. I don't need the book for that. But I didn't necessarily know who Ralph Lauren was, or I didn't necessarily know who Adam Levine from, what's that?
Ralph Lipschitz.
That's right, born Ralph Lipschitz.
Online, there's this Instagram account called Old Jewish Men, and they make a shirt that says Ralph Lipschitz in the Ralph Lauren font.
That's awesome.
Just saying, I don't follow them, but I've seen it.
And the little polo horsey is kind of like broken down and crippled. He can't really run that well.
He has a push cart instead.
You know, Bernard-Henri Lévy and Adam Levine. Adam Levine from the rock band Maroon 5, not necessarily known in observant circles, but really important to secular culture. You know, host of The Voice on national television. But then we also, of course, have lots and lots of people who absolutely know who Bernard-Henri Lévy or Monica Lewinsky or Adam Levine all are, but as you know, Stephanie said earlier, don't know what Shmini Atzeret is, because most Jews don't know what the holiday of Shmini Atzeret is. I mean, there are 7 different fast days on the Jewish calendar. Most Jews would have some sense that Yom Kippur is one of those fast days. And then another group of Jews would know that Tisha B'Av, which commemorates the destruction of the temple, is also a fast day. That'd be like this. If you know 2 fast days, that's the second one you know. The next 5, 99% of American Jews don't know what the next 5 are. So our book is one of those things that can teach you, if you are secular, all this observant side of things. And if you're observant, it can teach you the whole secular side. And to bring those 2 things together in one book is something that really, I think, had been attempted only once before in English language history. And that was with the Jewish Catalog, which first was published in early 1970s. And then there were 2 more editions in the mid-1970s and then the last one in 1980. And that was a real path-breaking book about do-it-yourself Judaism. How do you plug into this tradition if that's what you want to do? And so before the internet, that was the book that you would carry with you if you wanted to know, how do you hitchhike safely in Israel? How do you find a kosher bed and breakfast? How do you make a Passover Seder if you've never done it before? And that book was real. It sold hundreds of thousands of copies. But again, the last edition of that book was 1980. So for 40 years, nobody else had attempted to pull together in one volume between 2 covers this nice portable, satchel-sized edition that will teach the secular about religion and will teach the religion about secular, because Judaism is really all of those things. You can't have one without the other. It's not a religion, it's a family. And it's a family, some of whom are observant, some of whom the only observance is the TV that they watch or the food they eat. And they're both equally important and equally vital to this tradition.
You know, what I keep thinking about is like, what we're doing on this podcast, what we're doing in this book, we're trying to show that Judaism is fun. And it's something you can have fun with and make your own. And it's not just like being in temple with your parents for 2 days a year and being really hungry. I mean, it's not like what these, these impressions of religion we get as kids are. It's this idea that it can be what you want it to be. It can be whatever part of your life you want to make it. And I think that's what it is that we're trying to do, right? The point of the book, I mean, it's like, it's shiny. I don't know if you can see it. It's gold and shiny. It is supposed to be a beautiful object that you are proud to have on your coffee table and you flip through. And to me, that's a Jewish act. I mean, I think that so much of, this is marketing, right? Like we want to show you that it's fun to talk about this stuff. I mean, like, I don't know if you guys saw Joe Biden went to a Jewish deli called Call Your Mother after going to church today in DC. And it's like, we love that. That's great. That's funny. It turns out, I think what his COVID czar is a co-owner of that deli. But like, for us, that's something we're going to talk about on the show this week. It's not all serious. It's not all heavy. Sometimes it's just deli, Sometimes
I love that. We should I can't imagine a better stopping point than it's not all serious or heavy. Sometimes it's just deli. Professor Hecht, I know you're getting some questions in the Q&A. We would love to hear from the fine people of Santa Barbara and answer any questions they have about our podcast on Orthodox, about the Newish Jewish Encyclopedia, or about the work that we do at Tablet Magazine. So
Or
hit
about
us with
the state
something.
of the world, Judaism, history, anything. We are here and we're prime.
The best breed of dog to buy, how much fat you want on your corned beef. The answer is a lot. What can we help you with?
Okay, let me start with one of the early questions, which is, do you have Orthodox listeners? If so, have they received the podcast?
I don't understand. If we have listeners,
How have they received it?
how have they received it?
Yeah.
So yes, we definitely have Orthodox listeners. We did a survey some time ago. I forget if the number was 10% or 15, but it was in line with the percentage of American Jews who are Orthodox. Actually, a substantial minority of our listenership is Orthodox. Some of our most devoted listeners, I mean, someone like Sippi Pearl Turner from Arizona, who's been writing to us about once a month for 5 years, has been listening to the show very early on. We have Orthodox listeners in Israel, in England, in Canada. The really interesting thing is that we have some listeners who are the Orthodox among the Orthodox, Haredi or ultra Orthodox, whatever you call them. But we hear from listeners in very highly religious towns like Muncie, New York, or Lakewood, New Jersey, or in Borough Park in Brooklyn, for whom we are the entree into secular culture, Jewish and Gentile. Like we are their secret eavesdropping session once a week to hear about Jews who don't live in those kinds of neighborhoods or go to those kinds of synagogues.
I think that's certainly true, but I actually think that there's kind of an additional element here that makes me particularly happy. I had a conversation once with a listener who is from one of these neighborhoods that Mark mentioned, Lakewood in New Jersey, which is considered a sort of like I don't want to say the Mecca of seriously studious Orthodox Judaism, because that would be a metaphor.
It's sort of the Jerusalem of Judaism, as it were.
The other promised land.
Right.
And this is a person who's grown up in very serious, yeshivas like his entire life, and said, like myself and all my friends, we listen to you, again, no pun intended, religiously. And I said, well, that's great, but why? And something that really struck me is like, well, because the three of you, even though you're so different, it's really evident that you're just so proud to be Jewish. And I think that simple sense of we're not going to sit here and talk about the problems and the issues and the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, although we talk about them all the time. But the prevalent emotional valence here is like, hey, man, this is something that we're really excited about. It's something that makes us happy, that we like thinking about, that we like being. But I think to a very religious person who grew up in a somewhat insular community, to feel that vibe coming from the outside is a tremendous kind of like charge.
It's funny, when we were in Detroit doing a live show before the pandemic, we were on a book tour. We did live shows across the country, and it was really amazing because you get to actually meet people in other places, which is something that's so important to us as journalists and as people. And he said to us, he was modern Orthodox. He lived in an area where, everyone sort of lives near the synagogue or the shul, because you call it, if you're modern Orthodox or Orthodox, you call it a shul. If you're Reform, you call it a temple. If you're conservative, you call it a synagogue. We break all that down in the book. And
conservative, you call your mother.
He said, I really like this because I hear Jewish people who wouldn't be invited to my synagogue. Like that is sort of you're like, oh, actually, it's true. And it's not just Jews, right? And a lot of people, their faith community is rooted to the place they go to do that, right? And so if your church isn't bringing in someone who is talking about topics that, you're just not going to get that. It's really hard. And so I thought it was really interesting that he sort of was like, I go to you for like my Jewish diversity. And that's sort of what you two have both been saying. I mean, again, it's not something we expected, right? We called the show Unorthodox. I mean, I think that is very clearly like it means we are both irreverent. It means we are quite literally not religious, though some of us, are, and our guests sometimes are. But yeah, I think to me, that's like a good feedback thing, right?
And I should say, Richard, to your question, to our guest's question, we also have lots of Gentile listeners. We have lots of listeners who aren't Jewish at all. So we actually run the gamut in Jewish observance from not to totally, and then everything in between, which is just
friends who started listening to us.
Yes.
And like fully Irish, not Jewish at all, and he's in Ireland, and he just like.
And then we had the Welsh dude a few weeks ago.
Oh, yeah.
We had the guy from Wales who just loves us, and he had some questions, but
He said, I don't
works
understand anything you guys talk about,
right, but we're funny. Right. He said, I don't understand anything you say, but I think you're hilarious. So anyway, Richard, what else can we say? You got 12 questions there.
We have an enormous number of
Bring
questions.
it. We're going to go fast. We're going to be faster. We're going to be faster.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to. We'll never be able to cover all the questions.
That's all right. Okay.
So this is one of a member of our community who I've known for many, many, many years, Stephen Stone, who perhaps was sparked to write this question on the basis of your discussion of the Jewish catalog.
Yeah.
And Stephen asks, are you going to periodically publish new editions like the Whole Earth catalog? If so, what will your decision to update the encyclopedia be based on? My World Book Encyclopedia, which I read cover to cover as a mere youth, had yearly supplements. How about keeping a reserved email address for questions that readers would like to have answered in the supplements or the update?
So Stephen Stone,
you're hired.
That's a great question. You can manage our supplements and our email account. In all seriousness, we do have an email. It's unorthodox@tabletmag.com. That's unorthodox@tabletmag.com. And lots of people have sent us emails about stuff we missed, stuff we got wrong. I will speak for myself, and then I want to hear from Stephanie and Liel because we haven't actually conferred about this. Certainly, we have to update it at some point. This one has sold really, really well, and I think there's a demand for further supplements. And and we got some stuff wrong. We got the date of Jonas Salk of his death wrong. The who discovered the polio vaccine, invented the polio vaccine.
Fact checker, though.
What's that?
We had a fact checker, so there's not like a lot of errors.
We did have a fact checker. Like we got very few things wrong, but we're missing stuff. I mean, I think the next one will have to have Douglas Emmerth, right? Is that his name? Kamala's husband.
Emhoff.
What's his name? Emhoff, right? Douglas Emhoff. You know, how could we not have the second gentleman to be a Jew in the next one? So, Jewish history, thank God, keeps moving on and new things become relevant and fall out of relevance. So I don't think there will be annual supplements, but there will certainly be periodic updatings. And if people want to buy it and then, hunt down an error for us, we'll send you a mug, send us a good suggestion for an item that we need in the next one. I think that would just be great. And our listeners and readers have been super interactive about that already.
Yeah, I mean, we explain what Ashkenazi Jews, we explain Sephardic Jews, we explain Mizrahi Jews. I think something we've seen is actually people want to hear more about, I want to learn more about Syrian Jewry or Persian Jews or, Jews in Africa. I mean, there's sort of a lot of more specific communities. And we had at one point, I think there's a thing about world Jewry. We talk about some of those more far-flung communities that we don't necessarily think of as part of, when we think of, Jews across the world, which of course is, part of the Ashkenormative trend that we are sort of working against. But, I think sort of something like that we'd want to do more of different communities and a little bit of a spotlight on them, I think would be great.
We need an entry on the Jews of Santa Barbara. We totally overlooked you. And,
sorry. We hear from people who say, are Jubins in there, Jewish Cubans? And we were like, no, Jewish Cubans are not in there. Pizza bagels, so where people who are Italian and Jewish are in there. There's a whole entry on semi-Semites and the various ways they self-identify. So, I guess sort of some of those like more colloquialisms are not in there, but now we know that people want them, so we'll add them.
It's very interesting that you use Ashken normative because Rabbi Evan Goodman, who is the director of the UCSB Hillel Foundation, writes as follows: a big buzzword in the Jewish organizational world today is Ashkenormative. Many of the examples you've used have come from the Ashkenazic immigration to the New York area. Are there ways in which this book goes beyond the Ashkenazi experience?
Yes, it goes beyond the Ashkenazi experience in so many ways. I want to say something about this. So the first thing to recognize is that no matter how you slice it, the American Jewish experience numerically has been heavily majority Ashkenazi. That is to say, a result of the northern, central, and western European immigration and Eastern, but not Southern, right? There have been Spanish Jews. In fact, the first Jews to settle permanently in America, of course, and we talk about them in the book, were of Spanish or Portuguese extraction. That's, and we give a lot of attention in this book to people from, again, from Mizrahi Jewish communities, Persian Jewish communities, Syrian Jewish, Sephardi Jewish. That said, and by the way, that comes in not only in particular people, particular historical figures, but also in terms of cuisine, in terms of music. I mean, we did give a lot of attention to that. But that said, we're always learning more. Our historians are always studying more. We're always, the culture is expanding. And, one great asset in this project has been that Liel himself is from Israel, which is a country that doesn't make some of the same assumptions that Jews are Ashkenazi that we do in the United States, because the composition of their community in Israel is what? It's now about 50% non-Ashkenazi, if I'm not mistaken.
And culture is also very heavily, weighted towards that. So a lot of this Ashkenormativity was strange for me too.
So,
yeah. But I will say,
you have a thing about person Jewish. And so, yes, there's Yiddish on there, there's Hebrew on there, but there's also Ladino, which is a Sephardi language, and Esperanto, which we have a whole entry on. I'm not going to spoil it and tell you what it is, but, we understand, I think that, yes, we are 3 Ashkenazi Jews who live in the New York vicinity and work at a magazine based there. We like bagels. We also understand that, that is not the extent of the American Jewish experience. However, there's an entry for bagel Jews, who are the people for whom the height of Jewish spirituality is biting into a bagel and lox or a bagel and whitefish. So we're both aware of the stereotype and pushing against it, but also acknowledging bagels are a big part. If you just watch Seinfeld, you think bagels are Jewish food and bagels and babka, but we know that it's not, but we also want to acknowledge the fact that for a lot of people it might be. So,
I have to say, I don't even like babka. So there we go. I don't like rugula or babka.
Get off the Zoom.
Count me out.
Off.
Professor, what else can we tell you?
So I have another interesting question here, which reads as follows. Are you saying that this is really an encyclopedia of contemporary Jewish literacy that everyone should know, whether you're Jewish or not?
No, I don't think that. I think there's lots of people who shouldn't know this. In fact, I don't think anyone should know this stuff. I think should is the wrong word. I think that this is for people who would enjoy knowing this stuff. And I think Jews have are more likely to have an obvious connection to this. The late Jonathan Sacks gives the great metaphor, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom gives the great metaphor. He says, if you're a Jew and you say, why should I know about Judaism? Why shouldn't I care about all of world culture? And he says, well, you should, but he said, imagine walking in and seeing a bookshelf, and on that bookshelf are 100 books, and each one of them is the history of a different people in the world, and one of them contains the history of your people. Wouldn't you take a special interest in that book, even as you wanted to read them all? And I think that that's why a lot of Jews are going to be particularly interested in this material, but a lot of Gentiles totally vibe with this material. And we have such a loyal and devoted following from people who just love hearing about Judaism and Jewiness and Jewishness. So I don't think there's anything prescriptive about it. I don't think anyone should know this. You should only know this if you think it'll make your life better, because it's really, really cool stuff to know, in the same way that when I was 10 years old and discovered my baseball obsession, reading baseball yearbooks and books of baseball statistics made my life much, 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 much better. So I think that people should give it a try if they think that their lives will be a lot better. And I think there are a lot of people who will just find a lot of joy in this book.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to say, I have a general interest in religion. I mean, I imagine a lot of your students who are here are, even if they are not Jewish or interested in Judaism. I mean, to me, it's sort of like, if there was a Newish Catholic, I mean, it wouldn't rhyme as well, but if there was an encyclopedia of contemporary Catholicism, I actually would be interested.
Totally.
I'm curious of the ways in which groups of people represent themselves, right? So, we have friends at America Magazine. That's the leading Jesuit magazine, which is, part of Catholicism. And they actually totally ripped off our show with our permission. They have a show called Jesuitical, and they are 3 young lay Catholics, and they took exactly our model, and they do news. I don't know, it doesn't rhyme as well because it's not news of the Jews, but for us, that's actually great, right? If we can create a framework that actually people of other faiths, people of other cultures can adopt and use, I'd love to see a fun encyclopedia of all
totally.
Religions,
I want to say two final quick things. One is 100% agree with Stephanie. We want to see the Newish Methodist encyclopedia. We want to see the Newish Presbyterian encyclopedia. Bring it on. Entertain us. But the other thing is that I totally forget what the other thing is. I guess that's the one thing. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Okay, there's an interesting question.
Oh wait, I know what the other thing was. The other thing was, if what you're asking is this a cheat sheet? Like if you're going to a cocktail party where you want to impress with Jewish knowledge and you want to just skim, like cram for an hour or two beforehand, yes, it works that way too. So it's not that you shouldn't. That's right. If you don't need, it's not that you should have this, but if you think you might need it at some point, like before a job interview or something, it works that way.
You know, it's funny. We sign books after these events, and I cannot tell you the amount of books I've signed for Jewish mother-in-laws from non-Jewish like spouse, like or for their non-Jewish children-in-law to learn a little bit. Like it goes both ways, right? If you're, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of like it's a light way to say like thought you might be interested.
There you go,
Mom.
Okay, I have another interesting question. And that is, let me just find it for, several people have asked why it is that Jewish people eat Chinese food on Christmas. They can't wait to read it.
It's in the book.
They want to know.
I will tell you right now. I mean, why don't I show it to you? Because there's a whole the Christmas thing is beautiful.
Jews invented Christmas, basically.
I will say no one loves Christmas quite like Jews, but you know, basically there have been like academic papers about this. One of the best ones is called safe trafe. Trafe is a word, like a sort of a casual word to say not kosher food. A few different things, right? So it starts on the Lower East Side of Manhattan when a lot of immigrants were coming to that area. And so you had all sorts of different restaurants. But in a Chinese restaurant, you would typically find, so the basics of Jewish kosher laws, I don't keep kosher, but the basics of them are you don't mix milk and meat, you don't really eat pork or shellfish. But when you went to a Chinese restaurant, there was actually no dairy. And so like, if you get like if you go to an Italian restaurant and you want a chicken parm, that actually doesn't mix, like that's a piece of chicken with a massive piece of cheese on top. That doesn't really like fly so much, especially if these immigrants were a little bit more religious. And also we're in a very close-knit community where you didn't want to be seen eating chicken parm, as delicious as it was. So basically what you got at a Chinese restaurant was no dairy. So you could eat meat really freely. And then the safe trafe is because, you know, if you had like pork in an egg roll, it's chopped so small that like you really didn't know it was there. So there's that. There's also the fact that a lot of Chinese restaurants were open on Christmas historically because the proprietors were not Christian. Whereas, you know, your Italian restaurant shuts down on Christmas. It actually was a place to eat when you weren't at home eating a ham with your family for Christmas. So there's that. I mean, I think there's, if you look at the flavor profiles of maybe that's Ashkenazi cooking. There's onions, there's garlic, there's like, it's actually
sweetness.
Yeah. There's what?
Yeah.
Sweet flavors.
Yeah, I mean, it's like,
flavors, yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And you're like, oh, I just thought that my family ate Chinese food on Christmas. That was just our thing. It actually has like a real historical undertone, which I always find really, really interesting.
Yep.
So one person asked me to ask you, what one thing do you wish that you had included but left out? If you each could answer that question.
Well, my list of rabbis was about 386 deep.
Right.
I wanted to give respect to every single great theological thinker from the 900s until today. We had to cut down that list a little bit, but that's where I would naturally go.
I will say, well, here's one. I hadn't thought about this till just now, but I don't think, you know, when you think about Jewish American or English language authors, for good reason, I guess we didn't include my recent favorite, David Bezmosgis, the Canadian Latvian Jewish author, who I think is fabulous. You know, he's in his
podcast.
He has been on our podcast. And, you know, he's in his late 40s or early 50s. He's not obviously canonical or legendary in the way of Philip Roth or Saul Bellow yet. But if you want to say to me, like, who do I think it'll be pretty clear we should have in a next edition of this, I would say Bezmosgis.
I'm glad you said that, because we had David here 2 years ago, precisely because of, I think, his significance as a Jewish writer. I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone?
Never apologize for interrupting.
Okay, I won't apologize. So This is from Diane Zipperstein, who is the president of the B'nai B'rith Synagogue here. And she asks a very interesting question, I think, about institutions. And she says, what can today's synagogue offer to attract more young people?
I'm going to jump in, and I'm not going to say what Mark and Leo you think I'm going to say. I'm going to say, you know what? I think a lot of JCCs and synagogues think they need to sort of like water things down to get young people interested. Like Jews and booze, come have like a vodka tonic and a Shabbat service. Like I think that they sort of do this thing where they like, I understand it, right? You sort of want young people. What do we get? How do we get them here on a night they might be somewhere else? I mean, I think that actually what people want is smart engagement that just feels open to them, right? Like I think a lot of people, I don't know, Mark, you've talked about this. If you walk into like a mega church somewhere in America, there's like a greeter at the door who says, hi, what's your name? Is it your first time here?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, that's actually great, right? You're much more likely to come back. I mean, I think a lot of us, when I think about synagogues, it's daunting to walk into a new place and you might not know the tune of the prayers. You might not know the prayers at all. And so I wish there was a way to basically be to just really be extremely welcoming, to have, I mean, some communities are like that, right? You will turn to the person next to you and say hello and introduce yourself. Other communities are not like that at all. I mean,
I completely agree, but I also want to connect to something that you said earlier. It's this notion of, synagogues feeling like they need to, attract the young with
the Andy Samberg
stuff. Like I can't tell you, we travel before the world changed. We used to travel a significant portion of the year, and we would meet with really hardworking, really well-meaning, truly wonderful people whose job it was to answer precisely this question. And I can't tell you how many of them approached it precisely, well, just wrong. I mean, this is a straightforward kind of statement, because they would think like, oh, young people, as Stephanie said, like booze. And so we will have a Jews and booze night. And I would say, lady, if I really wanted booze, there's 7 bars like half a block away that offer much better liquor than you, and 7 movie theaters that will offer me better movies, and 7 clubs that will offer me better music, and 7 libraries that would offer me better book clubs. Here's what I don't have: a place that would offer me better Judaism. Maybe I do. Maybe that's why I don't come to your synagogue. I want a place where I could actually engage and explore. I want a place that takes its own commitment to these things seriously and lets me come in the way that I want to come in. And by the way, if you're looking, I think, really at probably the sole uncontested success story in this realm, not just, on campuses, although they're very pronounced, but throughout the United States, it's Chabad. And I think it's precisely because that's the attitude. Look, we take it super seriously. You could come in and just have a drink and celebrate Shabbat with us, or you could come have a class, or you could come in and really want to engage and indulge a lot more. It's completely up to you.
But the other thing we have to say about Chabad, and again, there are non-Chabad people who do this, is they invite people constantly and they invite them into their homes. I mean, I was recently having a conversation, it was so depressing, with a non-Orthodox rabbi, I won't say Reform or conservative, male, female, whatever, but who was furious that Chabad was like stealing the young people. And this person said to me, I mean, they just keep inviting them for dinners, and all. It's people just keep saying yes to going to Shabbat dinners, and then they say, do you want to make challah with us? And I wanted to say, well, why don't you invite people for Shabbat dinners? And hospitality is this incredibly Jewish thing, and then doing ritual with Hebrew during the hospitality is authentic Judaism. So I don't know. I mean, I think people like being invited to stuff. I guess that would be my one sentence encapsulation.
I'm yes-anding you here. Yes, and it's not just that. It's also that when you do this, you send a signal that the extent of your Jewish engagement doesn't end with the sort of like, oh, we have Friday night services at 6:30 and they end at 7:15, and then we have another thing on Wednesday. It's like, it's a 24/7 thing that we feel and that moves us always. And so there's always something to do. There's always a matter of our life that connects deeply to this tradition and to this energy, and come share it. And maybe it's in the synagogue, maybe it's in my home, maybe it's in the park, wherever it is, it's always resonant. It's not just okay, we've done our duty, now we move on.
I feel like, Rich, are you about to show the same page I am, which is the Booze and Jews page?
Richard, you only have like 5 minutes left. I want you to hit us with a lightning round of questions. We want to get through every possible question we can.
Okay,
That'd be great.
so this is one of the students in one of my classes who I think is following this in China. And he asked, so is a bagel Jewish food or not?
Liel, this is yours.
It is not any longer. It used to be. It came to us from Europe with a very specific tradition. The fact that the best bagel in New York City is now made by Thai immigrants, the fact that bagels are now available in airports in Wyoming, the fact that they're in a frozen section of every supermarket in America means that we have bequeathed them to the world, and now we want nothing more to do with them.
Yeah, I mean, how about this? So the bagel, a lot of people see it as Jewish. Yes, we can agree it's very universal. Now it's like pizza, right? Like pizza's not. I feel like people wouldn't think of it pizza being Italian anymore. We think of it as being just American, which
Connecticut. Yeah.
But the thing that I will say that Bialys are Jewish because Bialys come from a very specific town in Poland called Białystok, where someone accidentally mashed a bagel. Like it has a real story. So bagels, of course, came over with Jewish immigrants from Eastern Europe, but we give them to the world. They slice them the other direction at Panera. Do whatever you want with them. Enjoy.
Okay. I think I'm going to have to bring this to a conclusion. And what I want to do in bringing it to a conclusion is to point out, I don't think we've ever had a more joyous event about the Jewish experience in my 24 years of hosting these Taubman symposia. And this is a marvelous book.
Thank you.
It is an endlessly exciting book to pick up. You learn something, you smile after you read an entry, and then you can go on. Let me just give you one example of what this wonderful Newish Jewish Encyclopedia has. It's a photograph of Hedy Lamarr. And there's an entry, a full entry about her. And then what you learn in the photograph is, in the inscription under the photo, Hedy Lamarr, the bombshell actress, was also an engineer. She created a frequency hopping signal that paved the way for Wi-Fi technology. And I just think that this is such an extraordinary gift that you've created to help us understand, as you said, the secular and the profane and the religious components which make up Judaism. You've done a marvelous job with that.
I don't want to use kind words, but I have to tell you that Gal Gadot, the Israeli actress, is producing and starring in a film about Hedy Lamarr. So we are going to get all the Hedy Lamarr we need in the years to come.
Great, great. But let me just remind everyone who's following this that Chaucer's bookstore has the new Newish Jewish Encyclopedia. So of course you can get it through Amazon, but we prefer Chaucer's because it's just drive-by service. Call them, order the book. It's a great Passover gift to send your family members. And so don't miss out on this book. This is really an extraordinary book. Thank you, Stephanie, Lael, and Mark for joining us this afternoon and telling us about this extraordinary book that you have created.
Thank you so much. Our great pleasure. Till next time, till we're in person.
More joyous.
Hoshana haba b'Santa Barbara.
Here's to more Jewish joyous events in the future.
Amen.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.